Welcome to week 4. This was a much more productive week for me. I think Daniel felt the same way as well. I'm excited I was able to finish the taco shop deck. So all the cards are complete, the illustrations are done, all the values were calculated ahead of time so that I could just jump in and start working, which has been a real helpful thing for us. We've been able to kind of balance the deck before we even create it, so that's nice. So yeah, it's done, and Daniel has already implemented it into the working prototype that we have. I don't think it's quite alpha even yet, but we have a lot of elements working. We can play against the AI that he developed, so we're moving in a real good direction. It's been really fun to play with a different card set as well because it feels different, and that's a real fun thing to see some of that progress happening. There's still a ton of work to do, obviously, but we're making some good headway. One of the things I wanted to mention just right off the bat, Daniel has been blogging, as you know, but this week he talked through the different user interface adjustments and tweaks and changes that we've made. And so if you head over to the blog at mealtimesabotage.com, you can go and look through a bunch of the different versions and the different approaches that we had when it came to developing the user interface. And so you'll be able to see how we've changed it, how it's evolved over the course of time, and then even some of the things that really led to our decision to change it. So it felt like it was a real volatile process, and the fact that things did not stay as they were very long at all. And yet we're much happier with the process because of all of those things, though I don't think either of us would say that we're finished, at least when it comes to the UI stuff. Still got plenty of opportunity for us to allow that to evolve and grow. So that's good. The next thing, I wanted to talk through a real, a practical challenge when it comes to the illustration side of things. I'm a designer by trade, and so illustration is something that I do, but it's not what I do. It's not all that I do. And so I've leaned heavily on a good friend of mine who runs he's an illustrator, and so his company is called Orland Culture Shop. He does a lot of amazing things, and he's light years ahead of me, probably where I will ever get when it comes to illustration, because he works his tail off and he works really hard at it, and it shows. And so he's been very gracious to help me in a lot of the situations that I run into where I'm stumped in terms of, I don't know how to illustrate this, will you help me? And so he's given me some great advice, both on the design front and the illustration front. And I wanted to walk through a little bit of that with you because I feel like it's a really good articulation of some of the challenges that I've been running into when it comes to the design side of things. My design style and also my illustration style are very simple. I try to remove as much as possible. In fact, one of the things that Brian had mentioned to me was I was working on a design project and I sent him a file and said, hey, what do you think? Will you give me some critique on this? And he said, basically go through it and remove everything that you can possibly think to remove. Just continue to remove elements until you reach the point where you think you've gone too far. Then take a step or two back and evaluate again. And so what eventually happened is I began to understand as I went through that process with that specific project, that's a really good habit to get into. How can I remove as much as possible without breaking the communication of the piece? And so that's what I had to do. Specifically, the problem here was rice, one of the side cards. So when you think of rice, you likely think of a lot of really small grains of rice. Well, that's great if you're going for a kind of literal approach to how you visualize an item or a concept. And so in this instance here, the first approach was to draw less of something, but then draw a lot of it. So it's really that almost literalist approach of like, well, how do I actually draw rice? Well, I draw a bunch of grains and then I put them all together. So that's what I did. And so when you look at it here, you can see it sort of looks like a grain of rice. I mean, I don't know how familiar you are with the style of the game visually in terms of the illustrations, but this fits. This feels like kind of that polygon approach to that shape. The issue, though, is that this does not look like a bowl of rice. The way Daniel described it is that a bowl of shredded carrots? And I looked at it again and I said, I think maybe it is. I don't know. And so I asked Brian about it and I said, what do I do in this situation? How do you approach something that has a lot of complexity, but showing that complexity actually breaks it? It doesn't help. It's kind of like a pine tree. When you think of a pine tree, if you were to draw every clump of every needle, if that's your style, that works. But if you're going for something that's a little bit more symbolic or even something that implies the fact that it's a pine tree, it really breaks down quickly. So Where we landed was more along the lines of this. Illustrate the general form that shows clumpings of rice, and then add a few details, just a few, that help enhance that understanding of the fact that it's rice. And so in this case, you'll see there's a couple things that are that are doing that. The first is that out of the general form, we have a few grains of rice that are sticking up and kind of breaking that silhouette. And then additionally, we have some shadow pieces, and then some of the shadows are even covered over by other pieces. And so there's really this even implied depth to the card. And so when it comes down to it from a distance now, this feels a lot more like rice than this one feels, because this feels like just a bowl of something flat and not really dimensional, whereas the other implies a lot more weight and volume to what it is that's going on. So since we're in the file, I figured I'd show you all of the sides for the taco shop since they're finished. The first one, and one thing you'll notice here, the calorie counts are on it as well. All of the calorie counts are researched. And so we go through and we identify what are each of these sides, and then what are the calorie counts for each of them. Now, certain cards will find, or certain food items will find a dramatic range. Burrito is a great example. If you buy a bean and cheese burrito from like a Taco Bell or a Del Taco, they're very low in their calorie counts, but you can go to the other extreme and get some, huge carne asada, whatever, see if you can eat it in an hour, and you get a t-shirt kind of burrito. Those are dramatically more. So what we do is we try to find a pretty reasonable average. And so if you go to your typical Mexican food place and you get a burrito, this is kind of the number that you'd find. And so in our case, it ends up being about $8.50. And so that's what we valued it on the card. And so when you look at these sides even, these are designed, all of the cards are designed to be accurate in their calorie count. And that's part of the interesting side of the game, where you begin to understand some of the things that you're eating. And so when you get the nacho card and it's 1,100 calories, you think to yourself, that's a lot of calories, as opposed to another option that maybe is a little bit lower calories. And so that's part of the fun of the game, is that it's actually what real life is. And so some of the cards are surprising. Daniel even asked me about one of the cards. Hey, is this really more than this? Yeah, it is. And so anyway, that's a little side tangent. But so the first card here we see is rice, 250 calories. And then even on the design side of things, because this says rice, because there's just a written word description of what it is as well, I have a little bit more freedom in designing the card to be something that maybe is not as kind of hyper realistic. And so I love that, because the style that I do is not hyper realistic. Next we have refried beans, and the very few cues that I use here, there's just these little bumps, because that's kind of what it looks like, just a sea of beans with these little bumps and then some cheese sprinkled on top. It's very, very accurate to what I normally get when I get refried beans. Chips and salsa, same thing here. When you look at it, it's really just a red field that represents the tomato-based puree, vinegary kind of a flavor. And then we have our little tomato pieces, and then there's 3 pieces of cilantro, and then there are 3 little itty bits of jalapeno. That's really all you need to communicate the fact that this is salsa. That's all there is to it. And so I don't need to be going overboard, and I need to make sure that I don't go overboard, or else it won't communicate effectively what the card is. We have corn tortillas, chili corn, which is a fascinating item to me. This is another one that kind of represents 2 different approaches. I ended up going with a pattern because it really replicated what a dry ingredient looks like when it's on something. So I'm a barbecue guy in the sense that I cook barbecue, and whenever I put a dry rub on meat, it starts very granular, and it's a very heavy pattern, and it's repetitious visually when you look at it. And so that's the same thing that chili corn has, is that it's corn either with butter, mayonnaise, and then rolled in a chili powder. And so it's not actually a liquid or a paste, it's a dry ingredient on it. And so that replicates it well. The other option, and this was kind of the original approach to it. Oh my goodness, here we go. So this is a little bit more kind of solid of a form or of a shape, but now it looks like sauce. It looks like salsa, or even like barbecue sauce on corn. That's not what we're going for. And so chili corn ends up with a pattern, and that's that. Next is jalapeno. I'd mentioned last week that that is one of my favorite cards. Just drawing the jalapeno was fun for me. So I included a little bit more of those jalapeno slices just because I could. And then the last one is menudo. Menudo is a fun one for me because it's a totally like Southern California side or really main dish that you can get on a Saturday or a Sunday. But I'm really curious to see how people like back east, where Mexican food shops are not really that common, what is even menudo? And so we're actually thinking about including some details about what these foods are so that those who aren't from our area or from areas that have a lot of these shops will kind of they'll get a little bit of a cultural experience in the process and learning about some of these new cultures and their food. So I'm excited about that. The next thing is Chinese food has already been flushed out, but I don't think I'm excited about it right now. And so because of that, I'm going to hit pause and I'm not going to illustrate it. Instead, I'm going to move on to either Italian or barbecue. And I'm not sure if Chinese food will make the first initial offering. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. It's still up in the air. But that's one of the fun things that we have the freedom to do. I always like investing in projects like this because I enjoy them and because I want to invest in them, as opposed to there's this mandatory I have to get it done. There's some times where that comes up when it comes to a project like this, just the complexity of it sort of demands that it becomes work at some point. But right now I have the freedom and the opportunity to say, not interested right now, and so we're going to put it on hold. So we'll move to another deck for now, and we'll see what happens. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, we're going to start doing a weekly poll. Daniel and I had a conversation and a disagreement about what to name a certain food. And so I created a poll. I've already posted it on Facebook and Twitter, and I want your opinion on what you think it should be called. We're going to do this every week with different questions or problems that we run into, where you get to speak into the process of the game. My feeling is if you're going to join us for this process and as part of the ride, then you might as well participate and be a part of the game on a deeper level. We appreciate the fact that you guys are engaged and interested, and so why not jump in and speak into some of the elements of the game. So this week, the question is, what should we name this dish? And I'm not going to tell you what I think it should be named. I've already voted, and Daniel has too, and so we've split. So how about that? So we need at least one other person to vote. But yeah, every week we're going to post that. So on Twitter, we are at Sabotage My Meal, and on Facebook, we're facebook.com/Mealtime Sabotage. So connect with us, follow us, like the page, whatever it is, and also give us your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. We got a lot of work ahead of us, and I'll be working diligently to make some more progress. This week I'm going to try to finish designing the diner theme. We're pretty close, but we may try a few user interface adjustments to experiment as well, but we're moving along, and then I'll probably jump into whatever the next deck is that I'm going to work through. So thanks for joining us thus far, and until next time, see you next week.